Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of A.IdlePodcast, the podcast where I do weekly book reviews. This week, I decided to do a compilation episode of all of the books from Humble the Poet. So, I previously reviewed Unlearn by Humble the Poet, as well as Things No One Else Can Teach Us. However, I just recently finished How to Be Loved. So we're going to talk about all three of them. Now, Humble the Poet is someone who has a very well-woven background. So he is a rapper, which contributes to the wordplay in all of his books. He was a teacher in the past, which gives him the foundation for educating people, but also recognizing the need for relatability in order to help with other people's problems. And he also is a hustler. He only started selling books in order to support his rap career. So this is someone who is very well-rounded. And from his mouth, he puts words together in a way to make heavy ideas feel a little bit lighter. So, he certainly has a gift for it, but we'll get into that in a moment. Throughout all of the books, there is this underlying motif of Eastern philosophies mixed with modern problems that we're experiencing, especially over in the West. So being someone from the US, some of these concepts are a little new to me, and it's harder to wrap my head around like the concept of love, the way that Humble the Poet explains it, because I have grown up with a specific notion and a specific guideline for it. So, but a lot of these philosophies, like, we're pulling from different religions. There's like tones of like Buddhism in it, just different ways to look at problems that we're facing now that can maybe help you out a little bit more. There is also an emphasis on introspection throughout all of the books. He may not explicitly say that that's a necessary skill to get down, but throughout the book, there's several lessons and several quotes and references that relate back to introspection and just understanding yourself. And so really with all three of these books, I can sum it up and say that you're trying to get rid of the bad habits, to focus on the current journey and become a vessel for love. In other words, this is the unofficial trilogy of life, to me at least. Now, if you're searching this book up online, some of the context words that I would associate it with are self-reflection, personal journey, self-help. Even though I hate that category, I do not like the name self-help, but also just spiritual journey, love, success, help, all those types of things. It'll probably be in the self-help section though, if you're looking for it. Now let's talk about the Trilogy of Life a little bit more. So I deemed it the Trilogy of Life because all of these books give you the best practices for enhanced personal growth. Unlearn was released in 2014. Things No One Else Can Teach Us was released in 2019. And How to Be Loved was released late 2022. I believe it was like the end of December. So How to Be Loved is fairly new. So we're going to hit each of them in chronological order, and then we're going to break down further analysis. So Unlearn opens with the quote by Lao Tzu: "To attain knowledge, add things every day. To attain wisdom, remove things every day." And I know I've heard that quote before, and you may have heard something similar, but that's setting the tone for this book, meaning we're about to talk about all of the destructive bad habits that you may have and how to remove them in order to further your wisdom of yourself and maybe of the world around you. Now, why is that important? Because when you're trying to learn a new skill or you're trying to learn about a new thing, every day you need to incorporate something to learn that new skill. For a lot of us, we probably associate it that kind of thinking with school. If you want to be a doctor, you need to go to school and you need to be studying about the human body and all that other stuff every day. That needs to be your job before you actually become a doctor. That's how you learn new things. However, when we're talking about personal growth, so in order to grow, you need to shed a few things, because it's not possible to move to the next level, whatever that may mean for you, by doing the same things. So we have to shed some stuff. A lot of those bad practices can be summed up with the following: external validation, that should be a given. Relying on people outside of you to make you feel comfortable. Well, maybe that's not a good way to put it. To make you feel comfortable about the decisions that you're making, to lead you in the right direction in life, is not a good practice to have. Social media really emphasizes validation because quite literally we're giving each other likes. That's a really slippery slope, because why do you need other people to like how you feel about yourself or to like the decisions that you make in life? You don't want to be relying on people to point you in a certain direction, because what's going to happen is you're going to find out that you don't like the direction your life is taking you, and the person to blame, whoever that friend is, whoever that classmate is off living their life happily ever after. So you really need to rely on yourself and your own instincts and not necessarily other people. And there's more on that in a moment. But along the same lines of validation is comparison. This idea that you need to look at someone else to tell you who you need to be. Not really going to be productive for you. And that leads to a lot of self-pity, which feeds apathy, and it encourages self-sabotage. So being aware of your own footing is one thing. You really don't need to be aware of what everyone else is doing all of the time. Now, there are situations where that's beneficial. For example, if we were to look at it as you starting a business, a small business, and maybe you want to make muffins or something, and there is a muffin shop in your town. Well, you do need to do a little bit of comparison to understand what it is that they have that you lack, what their strengths are. You need to essentially do a SWOT analysis for all of the business people out there to just understand the market better. But when it comes to yourself, it's not always beneficial to compare against other people. Now, if there's someone who maybe is super successful in your field, you might want to take a couple notes, but you can't model your life after them. So don't continue to compare yourself to the outside world. And that quote, comparison is the thief of joy, or something like that. That's very true. You spend your whole life looking at what you don't have, you're not going to have a very happy life. Another bad practice is anxiety. So Humble includes a quote in the book by 50 Cent, which says, "Pray or worry, don't do both." So regardless of what religion we're talking about, from my understanding, when you're praying to whoever you're praying to, you're doing that with faith. And in order to have faith, you can't really have anxiety, because you're saying, I believe that who I'm praying to has my back, is pointing me in the right direction, and I'm going to leave it at that. You worrying about something continuously and constantly is going to chip away at the foundation that we're trying to build here. So we really need to find better ways to deal with anxiety. But if you're an anxious person, if people describe you as anxious, you need to remove that from your life. Now, granted, anxiety is one of those things that, as humans have evolved, it's necessary for you to feel some sort of anxiety if something's wrong, if you're in a dangerous situation. That's necessary for human survival, but it's not beneficial to be anxious all the time. From Humble himself, some stuff you can change and some stuff you can't. You need to just move accordingly, maneuver accordingly. Along those same lines here, we get into the discussion of ignorance versus apathy. So ignorance is not knowing. at some point in time, actually at any given time, we are all ignorant of something. None of us know everything about everyone every second of the day. So we are always ignorant to something. So ignorance in itself is not a bad thing. Apathy, however, is. So the difference with ignorance and apathy is, with apathy, there's a lack of interest, there's a lack of action. You may be aware that you don't know everything, but you're actively choosing not to learn anything else, and that's a problem. Apathy will keep you in a state of slothiness. Is that a word? You're just gonna, basically lazy. It's gonna keep you in a state of laziness. It's gonna put you in the back seat of your life, and it's gonna put everyone else in the front seat. So you may be moving through the motions of life, but you're so stuck on not rocking the boat, not making a decision, that, again, like I was saying earlier, someone else is driving for you, and that's a problem. So the message really here is just to be more proactive in your life by removing those core bad habits. And there's several others that are mentioned in the book, but those are just the ones I pulled out. Another interesting chapter that I found was the discussion on privilege versus selfishness versus entitlement. So privilege is what we need to start looking at it as, is what do you have at your disposal to succeed that someone else may not have? So there's another book, it was one of Charlemagne the God's books, where he discusses how having two legs is a privilege because everyone does not have two legs, okay? So let's look at what we have right now at our disposal that everyone does not have. That's not a given. Eyesight, everyone doesn't have eyesight. Use that privilege to your advantage. It's more closely related these days to classes and, the economic status, which is true. But, some people do have more money and are born into more money. But let's start looking at what we do have and go from there. Because again, you don't want to rely too much on comparing your situation to other people's situation, mainly because there's really no productive outcome from that. You're just going to keep talking about what you don't have. Okay, you don't have X, Y, and Z. That's a fact. Now let's get moving. Let's figure something else out, because I don't want to keep having this conversation about all of the money I may not have, because that doesn't do anything for me. That's not an action. Selfishness is just wanting everything. And entitlement is expecting everything with no input. So understanding the difference between these words often are like kind of thrown out there with a negative connotation to kind of shame someone, but recognizing the real meaning in them and then applying that to your life. And then another thing he discusses is idealism versus realism versus pessimism. Here's the thing. It's my opinion that there is an intricate mixture that you need to have of all of them in order to succeed. And it's, like a really slippery balance here, but you need to have some sort of idealism because you need to have dreams. Yeah, you need to have goals, a place where you would like to be that you may not be right now. With realism, you got to stay grounded, okay? You have to stay focused and aware of where you're at right now, but still keeping in mind, your ideal situation. And then with pessimism, I think that light pessimism is necessary for preparation. So you do need to be aware, if we're talking again about a SWOT analysis of the threats out there, you do need to be aware of like your strengths and how strong they actually are, because you can prepare, further bolster yourself for whatever it is that you're about to go through. So I think having a mixture of all of them is quite useful. Labeling yourself as one, I don't think is useful. I used to say like I was a pessimist, and I was like, oh no, I'm actually just a realist. All three of them are necessary to succeed, in my opinion. You just need to be aware of that and keep them all in check and make sure one doesn't overpower the other or the other two. Now, with things no one else can teach us, if Unlearn is about removing bad practices, things no one else can teach us is about being present in your life. So again, we talked about apathy. a moment ago, this is how to combat that. Patience and presence are like the overarching theme here. Under that is self-control. Self-control is going to help you stay on that pointed journey. It's going to help you continue towards that specific goal through purpose, and you find that purpose through introspection. Self-responsibility is holding yourself accountable to stick to that journey and keep going, and reverence is regarding the journey with respect. So there's been a few, I think, comedians maybe, and I want to say it was either, I don't want to get this wrong, I don't know if it was like Lil Duval or maybe Marlon Wayans. I don't know. I watch a lot of interviews with comedians, which, by the way, is very insightful. They're very introspective people, I think. Where one of them said, oh, no, I think it was Donnell Rawlins, where he said that a lot of people that he meets that he sees as successful, like these really uber rich people, he said that they talk about the journey more than they talk about what they have now. So there's an emphasis on the journey being the best part of the situation. Even if you make it to that end goal that you have, where maybe you want to be a billionaire. Okay, when you achieve that billion, are you going to just stay in that moment of being successful? Or are you going to like look back on the journey and look at all the good times you had? He said that a lot of the people that he meet like that have succeeded say that the journey is the best part. And I think that's a good way to look at it, because in the present moment, the journey is all you have. So focusing on what's happening right now, I think is a healthy practice to have. Not necessarily losing sight of what you want, but just being aware of. In that case, if we're talking about comedians, like, wow, I get to go to all these smaller clubs, and I get to work out these jokes, and like, this is the journey I'm on right now that'll take me to the point where I'm performing in arenas and whatnot. And that goes into my next point, where we're talking about the journey of life. So the idea that the ups and downs are going to come, just hang on for the ride, and that any type of loss you may experience, just charge that as a payment to life. That's your tuition in life. Much like how in school you got to pay to go to school, you got to pay to buy books and all that stuff. Any losses you may experience is a lesson, because it's going to give you knowledge, and that's just, charge it to the game. Everyone goes through, tough times at some point. So piggybacking off of that, another cool concept that Humble has is this zoom out versus zoom in. So zooming in is, first of all, reining yourself in, reining that anxiety in, and recognizing that there's no need to be completely dramatic, because it's not really that deep most of the time. And also, things are not black and white. So it's not, you can't say to yourself, oh, I messed up on this, so I will never get this. That's not really how it works, because that's not life. Life is shades of gray. And then, like I was just saying, understanding that it's not a win or a lose situation, it's a win or a learn. Okay, so I messed up on that job. What did I learn from that that's going to help me and bolster me in my next position? And another thing that he talks about under Zoom In is how social media breeds self-pity. Let me tell you something. The past few years, I have recognized that is probably the worst of social media, is people looking for things to be upset about. People looking for reasons to further victimize themselves. And let me just say this, that does nothing for you except keep you in a darker place than what you need to be. And it really gets on everyone else's nerves, because let's look at this. Let's look at other people and recognize that everyone has their own thing going on. And God forbid if someone were to post that they were upset that their sister passed or something. You commenting under their post and saying, well, my sister passed and I still did this and this and this, is not like, what are we doing here? That's like the worst aspect of social media. Self-pity is really useless. Does nothing for you. Like let's move on. Like what's the next thing we're trying to accomplish here besides make other people feel sorry for us or give us a pat on the back? Completely ridiculous. But the opposite of zooming in is zooming out. So this is gaining perspective by trying to relate to everyone. And relating, I find people don't really know what that means. So relating to someone does not mean that you're kind to them or you're being fake friendly to them. Relating to someone is trying to understand why they are the way that they are, where maybe you share similar tactics for life or you differ, and just trying to understand maybe the decisions that they would make. Because it's going to give you a better perspective on whatever situation, like if you're working with that person, that'll give you a better perspective on why they work the way that they work. And then you can then maybe adjust yourself to give your best to that situation, or if this is a supervisor you're trying to impress, how to best impress them, because now you know how they think. Perspective is everything, and you're only going to be able to do that, get that perspective, if you jump outside of your head and take a look around you. So that's very important. With that, you have to understand the difference between judging and understanding. It's really not your job to judge anyone, because again, it's useless. What is looking at someone and coming up with an opinion in your head going to do for you? Besides maybe like, if you sense like danger, I guess, maybe. But then people misuse that as well. So just understanding what's happening around you is probably a better tactic than just going off of judging. Just understanding the optics of what's going on in your relationships, your friendships, your workplace, and then going from there. That'll probably get you further than just strictly judging. And lastly, when it comes to zooming in and introspection, the one thing that you really should learn, and if you're doing it right, you will come to find that the world does not revolve around you. In your best moments, the world doesn't revolve around you. In your worst moments, the world does not revolve around you. So the next time you may go through a situation, maybe at work, where you're just stressing out about a deadline, stop and maybe look out the window and see, wow, the world is moving without me. People are living their lives, whether I make this deadline or not. That doesn't give you an excuse to slack off. What that needs to do, though, is pull some of that stress off of you, because you messing up at work is not going to be the end of the world. So just keep that in mind. I know that's been something that I've been using lately, and it's worked out very well. Like if I ever find myself too encapsulated in work or something, I just get up and like maybe take a walk outside, or I go grocery shopping, and I realize it's bigger than me. It's a lot bigger than me. So any mistake that I think may be like life altering, it's not that deep. So, and now we've come to how to be loved. So this is technically two titles because the D at the end of loved is in parentheses. So really this is how to be loved or how to be loved. So let's talk about what exactly that means. So first of all, this is not a book about how to find a mate. That's not what this is about. And it's really not like all about romantic feelings. It's just about love. And love isn't always romantic. So we get a good analysis of what love is. And Humble explains that this is a guide to actively be love. And within that, we get intercuts into Humble's life and his romantic life as well to kind of like reinforce some of the points that he's making. But love is, according to Humble, an ongoing action, and it's not a coveted noun. It's not something that you can own and just have forever. So you can't like go searching for it, find it. Once you get married, you found love, that's it. It's not how this works. And there's a lot of people that could probably tell you that that's not how love works. Love instead is just it's transformative on an ever-changing journey. It's really a verb. So you have to love yourself. You have to become a vessel of love in order to attract it. And a lot of this on how to do that is redirecting your best practices inward. And it's funny how it always really starts and ends with you. You need to be cool and copacetic with yourself inward in order to provide the best love for someone else. Humble says that you should allow love to guide our choices instead of love being the desire behind them. So how do you become love? Well, you connect with yourself to validate the choices that you want to make. So again, if we're looking at what we learned from the first two books, having that foundation, removing those bad habits and being present, we should already know like what we want and what choices we want to make. And then validating ourselves in those choices so that we can maintain self-respect. And self-respect over self-esteem. That was a very good chapter, and I would encourage everyone to read up more on that chapter. But just keeping in mind that it's more important for me to respect myself than have other people feel highly of me or whatever. I don't know. Now, honestly, it's my opinion that in order to actually become love, it's very necessary for you to read the first two books in order to connect with yourself. For some people, it's very difficult to be introspective. And I don't think it's a skill that I, first of all, understood until like I'd read a few books on it and I've been thinking on it for a few years, maybe 3 or 4 years. And it's not something that I feel like I've completely figured out, but it's like something that I'm practicing every day, much like how love, you have to kind of practice that every day. So it's necessary for you to really have a good understanding of yourself before you can be love. Because how are you going to provide love to someone else or be love for someone else if you don't know who you are? And you don't know who you are if you can't validate your own feelings, if you can't stand on your own 2 feet apart from someone else, if you can't make decisions for yourself without having anyone else, come in, chime in, whatever. So I'm saying all that to say that this is why I call this a trilogy, because I do think that the first 2 books set a very good foundation for what he is saying in the third one. And the last point on this book that I want to make is that intentionality becomes love. Humble says being vague is a language of fear. And being vague goes back to what we learned in, I think, Things No One Else Can Teach Us. You need to really know exactly where you're going. You need to have a purpose and you need to have a plan to get there. And if you speak in a vague language, that's your fear showing. And now you're becoming a vessel of fear and not necessarily love. And now, if you're a vessel of fear, you're going to stress everyone else out. So do us all a favor. Sit down with yourself, meditate, figure out how to be love by reading this book. Okay. So when it comes to the writing style of all of these books, actually, I would refer to them more as a reference guide. This is not necessarily something that you sit down to read in one day. It's not like a narrative piece. It's not a clear chronological plot line, which is great because you can start anywhere in the book, or you could just pick a couple chapters to read and be fine with it. You don't have to read chapter 1 in order to understand what he's saying in chapter 49. It's concise and categorized. So the chapters are smaller, and we're talking like 3 pages, maybe 4 in some cases, because you're getting a very categorized thought process. So the chapters are very clear on what they're trying to give you, and very short, boom, that's enough, that's done. There are several statements that are either bolded or highlighted that represent the larger idea in maybe one sentence, or maybe it represents what you should pull from this chapter if you don't pull anything else. So it reinforces the ideas for you, which is great because I didn't have to highlight as much, because the stuff that, like the short quotes or the short sentences were already highlighted for me. And then there's a few quotes sprinkled in throughout all of these books, which just reinforce the ideas and the ideologies. And of course, there's repetition. So when it comes to the idea of introspection, the reason I kind of framed it as this overarching theme is because it's throughout all of the books. All of the books are encouraging you to look inside yourself for the answers as opposed to looking for someone else. So that's an idea that's kind of repeated throughout the books. When it comes to, so with these self-help books, the one thing for me that sets them apart from other books and other pieces is whatever they're referencing, whatever outside material that they're referencing, because hearing someone talk about their life is great, but one person's life isn't going to be able to teach you a lot about yourself because your journeys may be very different. So I need some outside information to bolster the conclusions that you're making. So for him, he uses life references. He uses work situations, marriages. He gives you personal experiences, especially with how to be loved. He shares a lot about his love life, which was I wasn't expecting that. And so that was nice, a nice touch. And it was incredibly personal because we're talking about love, and he decided to, share some very difficult times that he had with love. But he also gives us scenarios. So he'll say, okay, so this is happening. What's the right approach versus the wrong approach? So he's giving you various general, situations that we all may go through, and he's telling you how to enact these different practices that we're talking about, or where the bad practices are and how to kind of remove that. And with how to be loved, so when it comes to him sharing his love life, he kind of intercut these love stories. So that was like actually the title on the page, and they were no more than 4 pages as well. But this would be, it's playing on the theme of love, and it's giving us more information about him as a person. And it really gave this book a very raw tone that I usually find with pieces written by James Baldwin, which is why I really love James Baldwin, because I feel like it's like he's talking straight from the heart, and you can only ever respect someone who gives you their words and their life, and they're sharing their stories with this level of vulnerability, because it's like everyday people don't like to share stuff like that. It makes people uncomfortable. So I really enjoyed those little love stories. And I think maybe like throughout the book, maybe there's 4 or 5, like every few chapters or so. So I really, I enjoyed that about that piece. Now, I will say, if this is your first time encountering Humble the Poet, it probably would be better for you to watch some of his promotional interviews first before you read the books, just so you can understand more of what he's saying. So I know prior to reading the first book, Unlearn, I hadn't read or heard anything about him. So I did watch a few of his interviews, and I was able to understand kind of the line of thinking of where he was going. And I do think that helped me a lot. So there's various interviews. I have a list of like interviews that you can watch on YouTube, but honestly, go to YouTube and type in Humble the Poet, and then just, find an interview or an interviewer that you like and click on that. Personally, I enjoyed his interviews with The Breakfast Club and Brilliant Idiots. Brilliant Idiots, hilarious. It's a hilarious show on its own, but having Humble the Poet in it, it's great because he adds like this level of insight that is really interesting. And they actually ask like a lot of really introspective questions, or I don't know, questions that we all would need the answers to. So definitely look at some of his stuff, listen to the way that he's speaking about how to be loved and how he describes love, and then purchase this book and read all 3 of them, honestly. And these all 3 are staying on my shelves because, again, I do think they're reference pieces. This is something that even rereading Unlearn in preparation for this interview, like I found myself finding new meaning in the chapters, because it's been a few years, at least 3 since I've read Unlearn. So finding myself being able to understand things differently now that I've gained more experience in life, even just a few years, it's been great. So these are definitely staples on my book. One more thing on my bookshelf, one more thing I wanted to touch on before we get to the takeaway is this whole idea of feeling love, being loved, receiving love. It reinforced a project that I listen to all the time by Luke James. His project is titled To Feel Love / To Feel Loved, because he has the slash before the D. And it made me think immediately when I saw this title that, like, it makes a lot of sense for the generation that's now, like, either going into adulthood or they're in like their 30s, they're going into their 40s, and they're trying to understand further this concept of love, because now a lot of us are getting married and having kids. And it really struck me how these two titles are so similar. And the project with Luke James, first of all, phenomenal. His voice is absolutely insane, but his songs very closely relate to the concept of this book. The idea that I need love, but in order to get it, I kind of have to position myself accordingly first, which means I need to get myself together, and then we can do this thing. So I just wanted to plug that project because it's absolutely phenomenal. The top 4 songs that I can pull from it, I think there's like 7 maybe songs on there, but the top 4 songs that really like very closely relate to this book are All of Your Love, Traveling, Go Girl, and Shine On. Excellent, excellent, excellent. So I just wanted to put that out there because they're so similar in title and concept as well. The only takeaway I have for this book is from actually the introduction of how to be loved. So Humble kind of is having this battle with his own inner wisdom, which I thought was, again, vulnerable to show the audience that it's easy for him to recite quotes in reference to other people and talk about these issues, but it's difficult to follow his advice when you're going through it. So it was nice to see him kind of show what he's gone through and his thought process, and him reflecting on it and where he thought he could go better, in future situations. So I brought that up to say that it's a work in progress. Life is a journey. We're constantly learning new things, or hopefully you are constantly learning new things. And we're constantly kind of like reevaluating who we are as people, because it changes throughout the decades. So even Humble has, some issues with love or with other stuff. And he'll tell you, like, he's very able to express that he's only learned some of these lessons because things have gone like horribly wrong for him in relationships or whatever may have you. But it's all to say we're all human. We're all learning. We're all growing. So don't be too hard on yourself. But it really should be your goal to further understand yourself constantly in order to further grow. So with that being said, thank you so much for tuning into another episode. I will see you all next week. Thank you.